Hello and welcome to our 2025 Bethany Lutheran College Science Symposium. Tonight we have Bill Starkey. He's an IBM Distinguished Engineer who serves currently as the Chief Architect of the IBM Power Microprocessor Group. His first position at IBM was in New York, right?
Right.
Poughkeepsie, and where he worked on performance and developing tools for microprocessors. Then in 1994, he transitioned to IBM's Power Systems Group, which Bill will talk a little bit about. It's a whole new architecture that was being developed back at that time with microprocessors. And he worked in logic design and microarchitecture development. And then in 2016, Bill became the chief architect of the entire IBM Power Architecture team. And he holds 300 US patents. And he's authored several articles. He gives presentations at industry conferences, client conferences, product launch events, and industry analyst briefings. And I don't know when he has free time to come and join us here, but he has graced us with his presence here. So if you would help me welcome Bill Starkey.
Thank you. Thank you, Perry. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm very excited to do this. As Perry mentioned, I've done a lot of speaking about the technology that we create at IBM, but I've never really done speaking exactly like what we're going to do here tonight. So I welcome you on this experiment with me. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And what I want to do is just share some of my perspectives. You guys are in school now. You're anticipating getting out in the world, doing whatever it is you're going to be doing. And there's a lot of interesting things out there, a lot of challenges out there, and I just want to share some of my perspectives from my journey. So as Perry said, I'm the chief architect of IBM's Power Microprocessors. Power, it has nothing to do with energy production or anything. These are computer microprocessors. Power is just the acronym for the name of the architecture. And I've been very blessed to end up where I did. It's one of these things, a lot of times in your career, God just opens doors at the right time, and you're kind of in the right place at the right time. I landed in Austin, Texas, right on the ground floor of when IBM decided to go really big and invest in this space. And I was right there at the beginning with so many people. And so it kind of put me in this unique position to be the guy who stayed around for another 30 years. You're just naturally going to be the guy they put in charge of it, I guess. I don't know. But with that, let's dive into a little more, though. I want to talk first about who I am, because it's important for me, for you to understand from my journey the perspective that I have, because I'm going to say a few things, and I don't want you to just think, oh, who's this guy talking? I want you to really understand where I'm coming from. So I am going to have to walk you through a little of my background just so you can see that. Where did I start? Well, I was a curious kid. I guess I was smart. I got good grades and stuff. I would really geek out on certain things. When I was probably 12, 13 years old, I wanted to buy a game system, because who doesn't want to? But my mom at the time, so this is ancient history, you got to realize. This is like 1982. So none of you can relate to this. But at the time, there were like these little game systems, and they were just starting to come out with home computers that you'd actually like hook up to your TV set and play around on them. And my mom said, why don't you get one of those instead? And she was really smart, because it wasn't just wasting my time frying my brain playing games. I was actually learning things. But the other funny thing was, at that time, that kind of computer, the processor was running at less than 1 megahertz. I don't know if you relate to that, but right now your stuff is running at multiple gigahertz. So divide how fast your chip runs by several thousand, and that's how slow it was. What does that mean? The games you try to write on that are crap. It can't really do anything. So I got a little deeper into stuff, and I realized, oh, there's this thing called assembler language, which is really close to the hardware. And I kind of nerded out on that, and I figured that out. I taught myself. And that sparked a lifelong interest in what is that next level lower thing underneath, and how does it all work? And that's kind of what led to my current focus. One other little side, I just got to call out my kinsman here, Philip Wells. Many of you here probably know him. His dad, Ron, is my cousin. So, it's a small world. By the way, I have several of my cousins in the back of the room, and even an old high school classmate. Thanks for coming to join me. So Ron, way back in the early 1980s, Philip's dad, was kind of a mentor for me then. He was teaching high school science stuff, and I'm this 13-year-old kid, and he helped fan the flames of my interest in computers. And so I think it's really cool that was the beginning of my whole journey over 40 years ago. And now here's Ron's son filming this talk right now. It seems like coincidences, but I think coincidences are really just God's way of reminding us that he's always in control of everything. So moving out of that, I got through high school, I went to college, a little school. It's even a lot colder there than here. It's called Michigan Tech. It's like, if you know Michigan geography, it's this little point of land that sticks up into Lake Superior. So I'm a Texan now, and that's why. I spent 4 years there, and I said I got to move south. I'm in a lot of pain here these last few days being up here, but even this is much warmer than it was when I went to school at Michigan Tech. They had a good computer science program, and like I said, I had this curiosity just to know more and more about the hardware. So I kind of, through the staff there, through the courses, learned a lot, basically enjoyed it even more, and then ended up getting a job with IBM. IBM is maybe not the big well-known thing today anymore the way they were. Now you got your even bigger companies, your Googles, your Apples, your NVIDIAs, but IBM is still pretty substantial. A lot of what we do is a little more behind the scenes, so you don't hear about us as much, but we're still there kind of at the heart of everything that's going on in computing. But back then, the mainframe was the big thing. I started out working on mainframes there, but then there was some cataclysmic things where it looked like, oh, mainframes aren't going so good. So it seemed like a bad thing, but God used it for a good thing. He transplanted me from New York down to Austin, Texas, where we were starting a whole lot of investment in the power line of computers. And as I said, I was right place at the right time, got in on the ground floor. So the rest is kind of history. What did I do at IBM? Well, let me just talk, there's the people and there's the really cool, fun stuff to do. Just to give you a little taste, beginning of my career in New York, there were a bunch of old timers there. So I'm like 22 years old. Well, what were the people who were like 50 years old, 60 years old doing then? They were the people who invented some of the original stuff in computing. So I got to know these people, hang out with these people. It was really kind of cool. I'm in my senior year of college. I have a textbook. The next year I'm working at IBM. I meet the guy who wrote the textbook. There were these things we did called Carnot maps as a way of reducing logic equations. I'm working with a guy who says, oh yeah, Carnot, he's the guy who used to sit next to me down the hall. There's these really cool connections with people. This guy right here, how many people in the room recognize that photo? 0. None of you know this guy. But this guy, his name's Jim Pomerane. He was an IBM fellow. That's the highest technical rank you can get. He was like 70 years old. And even though you don't know him, some of you who are in computer architecture, computer science, maybe you recognize a guy Jim worked with when he was younger. Maybe you don't. John von Neumann? Anybody recognize the name John von Neumann? Yeah, the fundamental modern computer architecture is called a von Neumann architecture. Every computer that exists today is built on the von Neumann architecture. Jim Pomerane was his chief engineer. So I got to eat lunch 3 times a week with the guy who in a younger life was chief engineer for John von Neumann. And a bunch of you still don't know who John von Neumann is. You're about to fall asleep right now, but let me see. Anybody know who this guy is? Jim Pomerane personally knew and interacted with Albert Einstein. So for me, that's kind of cool. I know a guy who knows Albert Einstein. And now it's even cooler for you is when you leave here, you can say, hey, I know a guy who knows Albert Einstein. Now that we're all friends, right? So, it's just really kind of cool. And these are just a couple little anecdotes about my early career connections back in the early 1990s. Of course, the people who were most important was all those people who mentored me, the people who were my peers, who have been my peers for decades, the people in my team. I've built teams over decades. we have customers, we have business partners, we have salespeople. It's just been a really incredible ride meeting all these people. And a place like IBM for me was a very special place for that. And I hope for all of you, when you get out into the business world, you can have, maybe not such a rich experience that you meet a guy who knows Albert Einstein, but, focus on the people. A lot of times we think it's about the technical stuff, it's about what we do in the job. Some of your best enjoyment in your career is going to come out of the relationships you form with the people. The other thing I got to do is build some really cool computing stuff. Now, here's a scene. How many of you know what that is? I know, if I asked this question 10, 15 years ago, a lot more people might be able to answer. Who knows the game show Jeopardy? Okay. How many of you know that once upon a time, we built an AI that played against all the Jeopardy world champions and totally kicked their butts? And if you're not really aware of that, this was all 10 years before ChatGPT came out, just to give you a perspective. This was some really early groundbreaking AI. One thing really cool for me was building the computer that enabled all that. So that was one of the high points for me. But what nobody really knows, well, I actually talked to a few people, and now I'm talking to you. At the exact same time, out of the same technology, we were working with the US Department of Defense, building this extreme, crazy, almost science fiction-y supercomputer that was 1,000 times more powerful at the same time as that thing that won on the game show Jeopardy. That was a lot of fun from an engineering perspective. In fact, we even think that might be the thing that turns into Skynet from the Terminator movies. At least, you guys all know the Terminator movies at least, right? Okay, good. I gotta make sure I'm not too dated with this stuff, I did run this by my son, who's 18 years old, and he says, yes, Dad, they're gonna know the Terminator movies. So yeah, I used to tease the people on my team that there were gonna be robots who were gonna come back from the future and kill them for what we were doing, or save their lives, depending on which side the robots were on. But that was fun stuff. A few years later, got involved in some supercomputing stuff. We had some great industry partnerships, worked with NVIDIA. NVIDIA's a big name now, all the big AI training that's going on. Well, the AI training stuff that NVIDIA is doing right now with their Grace Hopper architecture, we actually co-invented that with them back in 2014 through 2018, and we built it into what in 2018 were the two most powerful supercomputers in the world. Since then, NVIDIA has kind of taken those technologies and evolved them a few generations further, and that's what's doing pretty much all the AI training on the planet right now. IBM, we're not really in the AI training business, so we kind of moved away from it, but as an engineer, really fun to be involved in inventing and developing those kind of technologies. So those are some fun things, but what's my everyday stuff? The everyday computers that my team and I have built are these things that are behind the curtain that you never see, but they're basically the backbone that make a lot of the mission critical stuff in the world run. Whether they're this size pictured here, which is like a refrigerator size, or they get to smaller and smaller sizes. We kind of make them small, medium, large, huge, gargantuan. They're great at massive scale, running workloads at high utilization. They're ultra reliable, super secure. As I said, they run mission critical stuff. I won't read all the industries there, you can read off the chart. But if you think about it, whenever you do these things, there is a pretty good chance that what you're doing is somewhere in the background that you don't know. It's running through one of these computers. They're all over the place. We sell, thousands and thousands of them every year. So that has been really, there's the fun stuff like winning on Jeopardy or building some weird DoD thing or building a supercomputer with NVIDIA. But the everyday stuff that's changed over the 30 years and gotten bigger, better, faster, it's these kind of computers. So just what goes into something like that? So this is more of an engineering diagram, but basically, if you open the covers on one of those big computers, you've got these 4 enclosures, and each enclosure, if we just take a look at one of the enclosures, and just so you know, there's the 4 enclosures, there's one enclosure, and here's an actual photo of that thing, if you weren't quite following that. You basically got 4 processor sockets in there, all the memory, all the power, all the communication stuff. And then if you look at those 4 processor sockets, let's just look at one of them. We pull it out. That's a single chip socket. In that socket, if we expand that out, That is a power microprocessor. In this case, it's our Power 10 version. As I said, I've been doing this for many generations. I started in the Power 3, Power 4 time frame, and you just keep adding up numbers. Every 3 years, we do another major release, and this is the Power 10 that we came out with in 2021. Just to give you a sense, the features in this thing, now these are big numbers, but they're as small as 7 billionths of a meter across. So just to put that in perspective, your hair is 13,000 times bigger than one of these features on this microprocessor. Or another way to look at it, if you took a single atom of gold and you lined up 23 of those atoms, that's about how big these features are. So super tiny stuff, and that's why we can put over 18 billion of them on this tiny little thing the size of a postage stamp, and they switch up to 4 billion times a second. So if you think of like 18 billion things that could be a 1 or a 0 state, and they switch 4 billion times a second, you theoretically could have up to 72 quintillion 0 to 1 switching actions going on every second in every one of these things the size of a postage stamp. Why am I telling you all these numbers? I want you to appreciate this is complexity that is like so mind-blowing. What's going on in this stuff, like you can't comprehend how much is happening, how much sophistication has to be there for all this to actually work. And like if one little thing goes wrong, it all goes haywire. The whole thing just crashes. Over 20 miles of wire in these things, and imagine like their highway system overpasses. You know how you see them sometimes when they're 3, maybe 4 levels high. Imagine 18 levels high of overpasses. For those of you who are a little more, in the field, just some more technical facts. Those of you who aren't in the field, just ignore this session. Let your eyes glaze over a little bit. But, we combined 16 of these chips together. Remember that big computer I showed you had the 4 drawers with 4 chips in each one. So 16 things. They're totally choreographed together. Every chip knows what the other chips are doing, so they can perfectly coordinate in a dance together. And you got 2,048 execution threads, up to 60 trillion math operations per second, 2.5 gigabytes. I mean, I don't need to read it to you. I am really excited about the 128 terabytes of RAM. People get confused about that and they think, oh yeah, you got a whole bunch of like disks or flash storage or whatever. 128 terabytes, that's a lot. No, this is main memory. This is your DRAM sticks add up to 128 terabytes. If anybody wants to buy one tonight, I will sell you a computer that has that much memory in it. Anybody have like $10 million on it? I'd get a big bonus on that. 16 terabytes of access exchanges per second. What does that mean? Well, now we're a little into my technical specialty. Getting the compute elements to agree on which part of the processing, or which part of the memory elements they're using, and nobody can step out of line and use the other guy's stuff. It's like, who gets to read this, who gets to write this? Well, we can exchange those permissions at that rate. So going through a lot of technical details, but once again, just want to spell out the sophistication. This is as small as a postage stamp, but arguably, these things might be some of the most complicated things ever created by humans. I don't know, maybe somebody wants to argue some of our most sophisticated spacecraft. Yeah, that's maybe an argument. But within the realm of what human beings have done in the history where we've been on the planet, this is some pretty big heavy-duty stuff. Let's talk a little more about what it takes to do it. So this last one, the Power 10 processor chip, it took us 5 years to create it. We had roughly 1,000 extremely specialized experts doing it. And that's just this last generation. We do one of these every 3 years. And so we're sort of reinventing and building on it, standing on the shoulders of the previous thing, inventing new things, bolting them in. And a lot of the people contributing to that, we've worked together for 20 to 30 years. It's part of how we can do this as a team. And I can trace back 70 years of master to apprentice relationships in education from the very beginnings of computing, because IBM was there for all the beginning. Not these other companies can say this because they weren't there at the beginning. But the same people using vacuum tubes back in the 1950s through the lines of mentorship have led to what we do today. So if you think again in terms of human endeavor and technology creation, to me it's pretty exciting. And right now I am the chief architect, which means I'm in charge technically of all that stuff. I drive the work of the whole team, lead. I have a team of dozens of architects who report into me. I've been doing that for 30 years. As was mentioned, 300 patents. Somebody asked me, how do you get 300 patents? I said, it's just an occupational hazard. It just sort of happens as a result of doing this. I'm not telling you all this to say, look at me. I don't mean to sound like some egotistical guy, but what I'm trying to tell you here is what it takes to do this, what it takes to understand the complexity, understand everything that can go wrong. I mean, look at this. I drew these icons on the bottom here. Yes, this is actually a cocktail napkin. Sometimes things start on a cocktail napkin. But you go into some like scribbling on whiteboards, scribbling on graph paper, some PowerPoint charts, eventually getting into HDL code. You've got verification, behavioral waveforms. You've got physical designs. You end up with a processor chip at the end of this process. This is a heavily engineered, heavily thought out thing. And in the process of doing this, you're running trillions and trillions and trillions of cycles of tests to see, does it really work? And you never, ever, ever run a single thing where something went wrong and you say, oh, that's interesting, that actually improved something. No, if anything ever goes wrong in this, it crashes and burns, it wrecks the whole thing. That is the nature of systems of this complexity. They are so interdependent that any flaw crashes and burns and wrecks the whole thing. This is just another one. I'm not going to read you the chart, but I just want to give you a historical perspective. Some of the innovations that have happened over the 30 years I've been doing this in multiple technical categories. Some of you computer science, computer architecture people probably understand some of the words on that. The rest of you, don't worry if you don't. All I'm trying to say here is I'm a guy who knows a thing or two about complexity. And now I want to talk to you about other people who think they know a thing or two about complexity. So the first thing I say here, everything I've just said to you, my employer would fully endorse. The rest of the views in this talk are my personal views. These are not the views of IBM. This is the legal disclaimer, because we're going to talk about things a lot more than technology right now that not everybody agrees with us on. The voices of science. Got a few pictures in here, a few diagrams. This is what you see when you get out in the world. This is what I saw when I got out in the world. Bill Nye the Science Guy. You got the little evolution of the ape turning into the man. Probably nobody here knows Carl Sagan, because you got to be old to know who Carl Sagan was. Sorry, you just identified yourself as old. But if you know, like Neil deGrasse Tyson, he's kind of the Carl Sagan of today. Charles Darwin, obviously. You got some, prominent atheistic philosophers, Richard Dawkins. These are the people who are sort of claiming the ownership of how we're going to say reality is. And, that's accepted. Most educational institutions, government institutions, society, the news media says, oh yeah, these are the smart guys. They know this stuff. This is what the voices of science say. And, they reject the idea of a God. So, well, that's interesting. Do you reject the idea of a God? I mean, these are smart people. Should we be just taking what they say? Or do you have doubts? It's yeah, I trust what I've learned. I trust the Bible. I trust what my teachers, my pastors, my parents have told me. But, what about all this other stuff? How do you explain all this stuff? Or maybe you just live in a bubble and none of this stuff has ever crossed your radar, and now I'm scaring you because I'm telling you there's all these people out there who think differently. Are we stupid? Are we backward? Are we a bunch of superstitious people if we believe this stuff? Have you ever worried that as you progress, you get through your education, you go out into industry, you're going to be trafficking with these people? And eventually you're going to lose something where you're going to say, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I believed in God. I believed in all that stuff. But yeah, no, now I realize that's not true. You ever wonder, am I going to lose my faith? That was actually something I thought about a little bit as I was going through it, because I knew it was out there. I kind of knew what I was up against. And I recommend thinking that way. We don't want to wander blindly through life. So I don't know where each of you individually is at, but it's good to check yourself with what you know, with what you believe, with what you're going to hear out there. And I want to just tell you a little bit about, for me, how did I really have an answer to those things? And for me, a number one thing was, thankfully, through my parents sending me to the schools they sent me to, through the mentors who are around me, through the teachers, I developed a very deep understanding of what the Scripture says. And I would recommend anybody do that, whether you even believe it or not, or whether, it's whatever other thing, get your own understanding of it. You want to know what it actually says, not what the naysayers say it says. Little tongue twister there. Because you'll hear that. You'll hear all this misquoting, representation. So it's good to do that, it's good to have that, and it's good to stay close to that. We got to keep refreshing our knowledge of what that is. The other thing, prepare in advance, know the science. I was fortunate where I went to high school. I had a great high school science teacher, and he won a award from the American Chemical Society. I mean, he was really recognized by the secular world as a great science teacher. And I've met a few great science teachers here. I've just been here the last couple days over the weekend. I think you are surrounded by some pretty incredible, highly credentialed science teachers. So they paid me to say that, by the way. No, actually, pay attention to what these folks have to say, because they are prepared for it. They've analyzed this. They understand, but then they also understand, in the right light to look at these things. One thing that I took away was things like the second law of thermodynamics. What does that really mean? How does that apply to when these other voices you hear want to say certain things? So I'll use laws of nature. I'll use my understanding of that science to critically think and ask questions, challenge these points of view. I'm calling out a teacher of mine. His name was Milton Spouty. He was that guy, and I'm just very thankful that he was a teacher that I had back in that time. And the other thing, you always want to follow the data. I can forgive Charles Darwin when he looked at life and says, oh yeah, these things kind of look similar. I wonder if this thing came from that thing, came from another thing. And they're all kind of made out of these little things called cells, which they had like primitive microscopes back then, 150 years ago or whenever it was. And it's like a blob of living jelly. Okay, there's the blob of living jelly. All living things are made of these blobs of living jelly, and there seem to be relationships. Well, in the last 150 years, we've learned that supposed simple blob of living jelly, just take that one thing by itself, a single cell, it is a very complex architecture, which is not just like a computer kind of thing, which could run programs, but it's actually robotic. It operates in the material world. It is a factory whose number one job, first and foremost, is to be able to make copies of itself. So you have a set of machines, and they assemble copies of themselves. And then, by the way, they perform all these functions, and there's lots of other things to talk about at the high level. But for me, a fundamental question to ask is, where did life come from? How did materials that were not living materials become living materials? Because you have to take a bunch of random stuff, throw it together, and it has to magically, by itself, turn into a factory that is so complex that it can make copies of itself. And I'll tell you, as a computer architect, with everything I've done and my team's done, I still don't know how to do something like that. There's nothing we've done that we can engineer and build that would do that, let alone, oh, we didn't even do it. It just sort of randomly happened on its own. So you follow those facts, and then immediately you follow the math, and you say, that's so implausibly crazy. Who are the backward, superstitious people who can't think straight? I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound critical of others, but if they were going to try to call me that, well, maybe I'll throw it right back at them, because there is a religion out there that tries to call itself science. It's not science. It makes no sense. It's a belief. It is not backed up by the evidence. It's actually refuted by all the evidence. Wasn't refuted strongly 150 years ago. But we've learned a lot. Science has advanced so much in the last 150 years that science has refuted this thinking. Yet they still try to cling to it. So why is that, though? Because these are really smart people. So why would smart people be like this? Well, it's real interesting. I actually had a mandatory executive meeting this morning. I had to spend 4 hours today. Wasn't much fun, but we were supposed to read this book and discuss this book, how we need to improve our culture at work. And the book is called The Geek Way. It's written by like one of these management gurus analyzing human behavior. And the guy's an atheist. He believes that humans evolved. But he makes this striking observation, and I think this observation is true. Well, he observes that human beings as a species are remarkably capable of self-delusion. It is shocking how capable human beings are to, with all our brilliance, with all our intelligence, to trick ourselves into thinking something that's not true. And he even goes so far as to have an evolutionary theory, because he thinks we evolved. So we're called Homo sapiens, but he says humans should not be called Homo sapiens. They should be called Homo ultrasocialis. And he actually has science backing this up, saying if you look at other species, they're actually better at being smart or being quick or being whatever than humans. The thing that humans have going for them is that we form these social groups with specialization, and we take care of ourselves in ways in a group that no other species has. Like of any species, if you put a human baby out in the wilderness, it will die. It will not figure out. Most other species, if you put the young out in the wilderness, they'll figure out some way to live. That's one example that he uses. But basically he's saying the reason we can do what we do, the reason humans even evolved, is because of our social structures. And he says within that, how do you thrive? You thrive by being perceived as better than everybody else. And so he would claim there's an evolutionary tendency in humans to want to appear to be the greatest. Well, how do you appear to be the greatest? How do you really live up to that? You have to trick yourself into thinking you're the greatest. You have to trick yourself into thinking you're better than everybody else. And then you have that confidence, and people follow the people with confidence. From a standpoint, how do you find the best mate? Well, you find the best mate by appearing to be the only person who has it together and is the most confident. So I don't mean to get too far into this, but in his evolutionary thinking, that was remarkable. But he does say also they did so many experiments on people proving the way they can delude themselves. And what he goes after in here is how do we build organizational structures that will defeat that, because that is weak for an organization. Well, we're not here to figure out how to build better organizational structures. We're here to talk about how might these really brilliant people still get it wrong. Now, what I can say from a spiritual standpoint is, this makes perfect sense. In fact, that is the sinful nature that we all have. Go read Romans. I put the verse there. You can read it off the chart. That is the way people are. That is the way the fallen human is. We are all fallen. We're all sinful. And we are all deceived by our flesh, by the world, by the enemy. It's what we are. So interesting that this person recognizes that, even though he doesn't believe the reason why. But I just want to highlight that. This isn't just some Christian thought that people are capable of such self-delusion. So then, what do they do? Well, there's a lot of, should we debate? No, when you're deceiving yourself, you don't believe in true debate. You're going to do ad hominem attacks, and we see that all the time. Richard Dawkins, I remember one quote of his. He says, "I refuse to ever debate a Christian on the origins of life because they're too stupid to be worth debating." That's his answer. Well, can't you have the courage to have a debate? No, he can't, so he has to come up with a reason why he says he won't just by doing an ad hominem attack. The other ones you hear a lot, how could a loving God do whatever? Because look at the world around us. Just some simple, flawed logic. Well, wait a minute, you're putting God in your box. How do you know what God is? How do you know any of these things? Oh, well, I think I'm smarter than everything. I think I'm smarter than God, so let me define who God is. Once again, self-delusion. Play the victim. oh, look at those religious people. Look at all those holy wars. Look at all the people that kill. They're bad people. Religion's bad, blah, blah, blah. You know, they try to play that card. So, and then they'll even change the rules of science. Like, they still have to come up with an origin theory. So this is really great. We'll come up with other origin theories. No, there wasn't a God, but we recognize the math says that I can't shake up a bunch of matter for long enough and have it turn into a robotic factory that makes copies of itself, because the probabilities are too far off. Well, wait a minute. What if I just make up a thing and I say there's a multiverse with an infinite number of universes in it? Well, if there's an infinite number of universes, then I can say anything could have happened once. And I'll say we're in that weird universe where that happened. Well, that's fine, but if you want to say there's a multiverse, you're breaking those rules of science that you use on others when you say, oh no, you're not allowed to talk about anything that can't be tested with a scientific experiment. Another great one that I love is, and this is taken from the Alien series of movies, it's popular in entertainment. Oh, well, maybe there's these really smart aliens like millions and millions of years ago, and they came and they sort of had DNA and they sort of had the beginnings of it, and they sort of engineered life, and then life sprung from all that. Okay, wait a minute. The super intelligent alien entity that was the creator of life, doesn't that sound a little bit like God? It's not us, it's, you know. So once again, they're trying to say there is no God, but they need to create a God construct to make the existence of life plausible. That's all great, but let's get back to my journey. I talked about earlier some of the things that I ran up against that I felt prepared me, but I was still a little worried. What happens when I get into the industry? You know, am I going to run into something that makes me question my faith? So, as a processor architect, the more and more I learned, the more, as I said earlier, I recognize the amount of intelligence that has to go into developing the most complex processor architectures on the planet. And the funny thing was, I started to hear more and more about the biology of a single cell, and the more I knew about advanced computer microarchitecture, the more I saw parallels. I saw things that as a person who didn't know advanced computer architecture, I never would have realized these things. I never would have recognized them. I mean, I can see in cellular biology, the very mechanics of life, there are analogs to you know, advanced computational and storage systems. You look at the information in DNA sequences, they're like programs and data structures. Mapping from DNA to function. Here's a good computer architecture one. There are things called RISC architectures in computers and CISC architectures. It's a whole different style of how you create the microprocessor execution elements. And with CISC, there's a greater level of abstraction between encoding and function. But with RISC, the encodings and the function are much closer to the things that implement the function. Well, if life had evolved, if somehow all this evolved, it would logically follow that the way DNA is encoded in a cell would most likely look like a RISC architecture in a computational realm. But in fact, as they've discovered more and more about how things work, it actually looks more like a CISC architecture. How would it have made that jump? It would have had to go through that simpler thing, and then we would still see that today. That's one example of why I think, you know, God put that in there just as another way to say, no, here's the clue, look at the data. People talk about genetic mutations. Well, sure, things change through genetic mutations, but the way you got to apply genetic mutations, you look at DNA sequences and how things can alter over time across generations. That, in computational terms, is a lot like you're writing a program and you're calling a function, and you can plug a variable as a parameter in that function. And so, you know, you could pass something that's equal to 1, or you could pass something that's equal to 10, or whatever. But it's within the constraints of that typed parameter passing, and it goes into the function to get the function to do different things. You cannot call any random defect where just some thing goes out of place. That is not the equivalent of genetic mutation. In a computer, if I'm building a computer, if I make that one mistake somewhere, it wrecks the whole computer. It doesn't change into something better. So you got to look at the details. You got to look at the architecture of where genetic mutation can happen and the way it's used to diversify life. It's part of the design of the way life was intended to be diversified through regular function calls, not through randomly switching transistors out in the underlying hardware, so to speak. The other thing really cool, you look at error correction codes, ECC codes, CRC codes in the computer realm. We do see error correcting like things just to protect against random genetic mutations happening in other places outside of the defined parameter passing schemes. So I know I might be, talking a little bit beyond people who don't have that computer background, but I just want to share, these are things that I saw as I evolved as a computer architect that I would not have comprehended or appreciated before I got to the level of competence I did in my field. So, this leads to some conclusions. As I said, the cell's a robotic factory. It makes copies of itself. So once again, that's where the comparison to a computer breaks down. It's so much more than computation. Things are moving and acting in the material world, and that's why I'm saying robotic. So the real question is, how many different things had to self-assemble to build that factory? Hundreds? Thousands? Millions? Billions? Trillions? Getting into the trillions realm, where we're kind of starting to get there. Keep in mind, how do they even self-assemble? You look down at the molecular level, you look at like proteins folding and things like that. You look at, well, wait a minute, what are the fundamental forces in nature? The strong forces, the weak forces. What are the ways molecules interact, the particles in molecules interact with each other? It's beyond even like engineering the thing that you made. It's like somebody really smart even made the rules by which the dynamics can happen. Once again, how did that happen? Where did it come from? Well, there's a creator that created all those rules with the intent that those rules would be able to be utilized in a way to provide the diversity of functionality that's necessary to take these elements and build them into things that'll do what they do to robotically become factories that make copies of themselves. Yeah, complexity, zero tolerance. Anything out of place doesn't work. Any defect destroys the system. My conclusion, God is the ultimate architect. It's beyond our understanding. And I know I have some cellular biologist type people here, and I don't want to offend anybody, but you might say, well, what about all these brilliant PhD, they know the cell, they know. Why aren't they saying this, Bill? Why aren't they saying, oh, this is way too complicated, it can never happen? Well, in a way, that role, they're kind of like an archaeologist. They just look at what is, they describe what is, it's all fascinating. Look at the way these things happen, look at the way the proteins fold, look at all that. But they're not skilled in the art of knowing how to build an advanced computational architecture that will actually make those things happen. So you can see what happens. Any of you can see the output of a computer, and you can describe the output of the computer. But can you tell me how that computer was built to produce the output? That's a whole different skill set. Maybe I'll talk a little more, but in conclusion, my workplace, all those worries I had, it's fantastic because we've all lived this together. So basically everybody has abandoned their atheistic points of view. They all believe there's a God, and most of them are Christians. And we all get together and we talk about this all the time. It's wonderful. I hope you go in a field like that. Best of luck when you hit the workplace. And with that, I thank you very much. Oh, wait a minute. So unfortunately, still, even in this world, and it blows my mind because these people live this stuff, but they are incredibly capable of self-deception. So they kind of resemble these other guys a little too much. So with that, there is a challenge, even in a workplace where you would think, and I thank the Lord. I thank the Lord for giving me this insight to make it so much more obvious to me that there's no way any of that evolution stuff to create life could have happened. Unfortunately, I have colleagues that still just turn a blind eye to it. So, it's my hope that what I've shared with you and some of these tactics, knowing God's word so that when other people try to say it says something it doesn't, no, that's not what it really says. Here's what it says. Knowing the science, basic laws of nature like the second law of thermodynamics. knowing the math, knowing the probabilities, following the data, and then maybe even, hopefully I've given you a little more than that by giving you my perspective. Maybe one or two of you will become computer architects someday, and you'll enjoy experiencing that like I did. But if not, I hope I managed to share something with you. And it kind of prepares you for what you're going to see out there, what we're all going to see out there, that you're going to have these people who are really smart people. And I'm not trying to say these are bad people. They're just, unfortunately, self-deluded people. And they have their points of view. So we're going to run up against them. So that's one thing I want you to take away. But the other thing I want you to take away is that's kind of playing defense. God loves all those people that I just talked about. God loves all people. God wants everybody to know you don't need to run away from the idea of God. You don't need to be somebody who says, I have to figure out a way that there can't be a God because I'm really afraid to meet that guy someday because I know what will happen to me when I do. We need these people to hear the good news that they don't have to be afraid of God. They need to embrace His grace. They are forgiven. We're all forgiven. There's nothing we got to do. We want to get them the good news. So instead of just playing defense, maybe we can play a little offense here. And I'm just going to kind of quickly cover 3 areas, once again, kind of from my journey, a little bit of what I've learned along the way. We all are where we are because God put us there. So in the workplace, I'm an ambassador. How am I going to behave? We're always looking at 2 kingdoms. I have my faith kingdom, I go to church on Sunday, participate in Bible studies, things like that. I have my work kingdom. I go there every weekday. I'm dealing with that. How do those 2 kingdoms interact with each other? And then finally, what's the landscape in the workplace? So just walking through, in a little more detail. As I said, we are ambassadors. When we go into the workplace or anywhere else in the world, if we know that good news ourselves, how do we share it with other people? And most of the time when I actually can get into a conversation with some of these people who don't believe it, it's uncanny how many of them will open up and tell of some really bad experience they had with somebody who at least claimed to be a Christian. And, oh yeah, I used to believe, and then this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this person did this terrible thing, and this, and this, and this, and I just can't believe in God anymore. That's really tragic. It's really tragic if that's what happened. So one thing I can try to do is not be like that. Not be that person. Show them that, I don't know who that was you ran into. Really sorry that happened. Why should that screw up your relationship with God? You're actually going to let this other person get in the way of the God that loves you and wants to care for you and give you everything. But you cannot logically debate them into believing. So like everything I told you tonight, I did not tell you any of this stuff to say, oh, now go talk to your people that you know about this stuff. You will never argue anybody into that. You will never use that, like all this analogy between computation and the cell, any of these other arguments. You're never going to argue anybody into believing. Because they will always have a way to, that self-delusion thing can kick in. That's really just to protect you against people who are trying to convince you otherwise. It can corroborate what you believe, but it cannot be the belief. Instead, love people. Be the one they think is the kind person. You're the person who can support them, who can encourage them, who can be that friend when they need a friend. And maybe then, in some weak moment where you're comforting them in some way, then the right kind of conversation opportunity opens up. For me, a lot of really smart people. I am in a world of crashing egos. You might have heard me talk tonight for the first part of the talk. You might think, man, that guy's got a big ego. He's really telling all this great stuff he did. Well, as you know, I was just telling you that so that I have some credibility to say what I said next. Humility shines very brightly. Be that person that people say, wow, that person's so great and so smart, but they're so humble. I just love that. It draws people in. It's like a light. Recognize people's special gifts. Encourage them. You know, God made everybody uniquely, specially equipped, that we're all so precious and special. And too often the world just like picks on people, tears them down. Be the person that recognizes the value and encourages them. That's what they need to hear. And just, don't talk about it, do it. You will screw that up miserably again and again and again. And I have again and again and again. It's okay. Just keep trying. Because that's the beauty of it. You're forgiven. God knew you were going to screw it up, and you already fixed it before you screwed it up, so it's going to be taken care of another way. And this is the message, not just for us, but that's for all these people who want there to not be a God because they're worried about getting punished. You're forgiven. Jesus did it for us. You don't have to worry about that. So, preach that to yourself because you're going to need to, and hopefully that can spill over on the people around you. Just enjoy the ride. Connect with your superpower. God made every one of you special, as I said. You all have a superpower. Figure out what it is. This isn't so much from a spiritual standpoint. This is just, you want to enjoy your career. Do something that you love to do. Do something that you love getting up in the morning and going into work and doing it. It's part of the richness of life that God wanted you to enjoy when He put you here. He made you for that. Figure out what it is. And corporate politics, career advancement, just an interesting thing, at least in my experience. Every time I've ever sort of gotten into this mindset where I'm angling for something, like, oh yeah, I need to get that next thing. Oh, I got to get perceived this way so that this good thing happens for me. I've always been frustrated and hit a wall. Well, then you might ask, well, Bill, how did you get to be the chief architect? Well, every time I kind of forgot about all that stuff and I just tried to be that good person I was describing, somehow the Lord just made things happen in the right way, and He got me where He got me. I sure didn't get it by being smart, I'll tell you that. There's a little bit of that humility come through. But yeah, it's just been uncanny. It's amazing. It's the exact opposite of how you would think the world would work, and it's just a reminder that God's in control. Be the person that you know He wants you to be, and let Him take care of the stuff that you're worried about. Blending the two kingdoms, synergy, not separation. I've loved it in my experience, like with what's going on in the church side of my life, with the business side of my life. Went from leading projects at work and having that leadership expertise, and that got developed on the job. Well, wait a minute now. I have those skills. How, as a lay leader in my church, can I serve? And it's been really interesting the way the Lord has opened doors that I can take things that I learned in the workplace, and now I can serve in my church. Something went the other way. One of the ways I was serving in church was just teaching Bible study. My pastor asked me to do it almost 25 years ago, got started on it. I was always kind of a nervous introvert. Do I sound like a nervous introvert so far tonight? It sort of got me comfortable with public speaking, and one thing led to another in the workplace. And now I'm going all over the world giving keynote speeches to huge audiences. Funny how that came out of something I developed just teaching a Bible study in church. Be that spiritual encourager in everything that you're learning how to do in your church family. And it's safer and it's easier to encourage people who believe the way you do, so that's a great place to learn that. But then as you build, be that person in the workplace, like I was describing earlier, that you're an ambassador, that you love on people. So shouldn't think of these are two separate worlds, keep them separate. See how you can blend your skills across these worlds. Be a selfless, caring servant leader. If you get a good job out there, you're going to make a lot of money. It's going to be great. I don't make a ton of money, but I make pretty good money. Learn how to invest that money wisely. There's a lot of good that can happen through the kingdom work. So give generously, give joyously. Be happy to know that you can make an impact for something that matters forever. Every computer that I have been a part of building is going to burn up. It's all going to burn up someday. There's nothing good that's going to be left from that. But if I can take some of that money that I earned making all those computers and I can bless other people, I can bring souls for God, that's going to last forever. That's true goodness. And there is a little verse in Malachi where the Lord says, test me in this, give, see what happens. Strange thing in my personal life. I'd always sort of, well, maybe I can give this much. I can make donations this much, percentage, math. I like the math. Let's figure it all out. And every time that I ever said, you know what? I'm gonna jack that up a little bit. I think I can do more. It was uncanny how within the next 6 months or so, I'd have some huge unexpected thing at work where it's either a big raise or some big bonus. It's almost like God was just saying again and again, look, every time you loosen up a little bit and realize that you can trust me, just give some more, he's rewarded it. I'd encourage you to do the same experiment. Test the Lord in that. It's the one thing he says, test me in. A lot of times he said, don't test the Lord. This one he says, test me in it. So, the landscape. As I said, where I work, it can definitely feel like a barren wasteland. It's, how do I ever talk to anybody? How can I ever let my light shine? There's just so many people who don't want to hear a thing about it, shut the door on you, slam the door on you. But find the hidden believers. They're there. Here and there. They're usually hidden behind a curtain somewhere, but they're there. And by finding them, engaging with them, you really can build relationships that are going to help you as you go through this journey trying to do these things. Because there are always people in the middle. There are people there who are needing to hear the good news and will respond to it. Might not happen that often, but when it does, it's huge. You're going to run into different kinds of people. So I've been amazed. Sometimes people that I would have thought like, oh, this is a dog-eat-dog world. I assume they're probably going to try to get the upper hand on me. God has used those people to bless me in ways. People I never would have expected to advocate for me. That's just the Lord, using people to bless you. He's going to do that. Let him do that. You might get people who do kind of what you thought they were going to do. They stab you in the back. Well, fight back. Just tear them up. Destroy them. No. Let God do that. Once again, just let God, just be forgiving. Sometimes the fact that you don't react the way they think, that's a big wake-up call for them. God might use that for their good. But remember, God placed you in the right place at the right time. He knew exactly what he was doing. So I don't know exactly where you guys are going to end up for a job, for a career. But he placed you there. So it might look like that barren wasteland, and you're thinking like, well, what am I doing here? I can't do any good in that regard. He placed you there. There's a reason. I want to end on a little story. As I was joking earlier, just my kinfolk here, I got Philip doing the video, and over 40 years earlier, it was his dad got me into this thing, and God likes to do that with coincidences to remind us that he does what he's doing. Well, God's playing chess all the time. So what was my special place I needed to be? I had a thing with a neighbor moved in, but I never got to know the neighbor because he was really sickly. He had heart issues. He probably lived across the street for over a year, never set foot outside the house, so never really met him. We're busy people. You're coming, you're going. And then one day an ambulance comes to his house and, rushes him away. Talked to his wife a little more, learned, oh yeah, he's got really bad heart stuff. It's probably not going to be long. He's not long for this world. And then she started lamenting that, and he's total atheist, yells and screams, throws F-bombs at anybody who would try to approach him. talk about God. He's done this his whole life. He's a real rough and tumble guy. And she's kind of marginally Christian herself, and she's a little worried about what's going to happen to him. And I could talk for a long time on this, but I'll make it short. Weird things happen where one thing led to another, where this guy becomes aware of my background and my credentials. And he says, I want to talk to that guy. He wanted to talk to me. So I went over and talked to him, and he starts quizzing me on what I believe. But he somehow had some respect for me from a science standpoint because he understood, like all these things I told you earlier, and that mattered to him in where he was, in his head, and all his self-deceptions that he had been under. He was willing to set aside those self-deceptions if he could hear the right answers from me about God and why I believed. And I didn't know what to say. I don't even remember what I said. But after that, that man came to faith. And I spent a lot of time with him after that. We talked a lot. And he just joked at like, wow, yeah, I'm going to die soon, but now I get it. I believe. And there's going to be so many people in heaven who see me and they're going to say, what are you doing here? And he was like laughing about it, joking about that. And it wasn't like 2 weeks later, I was with him. I held his hand when he died. I was in the right place at the right time. And that's where God puts us. God played a real crazy game of chess, did all those moves, lined everything up. I was the pawn in the game that God said, checkmate. I got another soul that I can bless for eternity. So he will put you in the right place at the right time. With that, that's what I had to share tonight. I hope you enjoyed the talk, and we can take some questions. Thank you.